Okay, so good morning everyone. So today we are going to learn about growth curves and pattern of growth. Alright, so let's go to the first one, growth curves. Alright, there are three types of growth curve. The first one is absolute growth curve. Now, this absolute growth curve is a graph of absolute parameter against time. Okay, example of absolute parameters are length, height, mass, surface area, and volume. So absolute growth curve will show overall growth pattern or rate of growth, because we have the absolute parameter, right, plotted against time. That will give you rate of growth. Now this absolute growth curve can be represented with sigmoid or S-shaped curve, right? And when it comes to S-shaped curve, there are four faces here. So this is the sigmoid curve, right? So we have the face A, B, C, and D. So face A is represented with the lag phase. Okay, lag phase shows you slow growth because the organism is young and just introduced to the environment. Okay, another factor that contributes to this slow growth is because of the slow cell division and differentiation in that organism. Now, this is the log phase, right? This log phase is represented with the steep curve. Any sigmoid graph that has steep curve like this, or it has the steepest curve, right? This can be represented with an active or rapid activities in part of the graph. Alright, so now in this log phase here, the growth here is rapid and exponentially because of the unlimited food supply and conducive environment that promotes growth in that organism. So they grow very rapidly. And then C here is the linear phase, where the growth slows down, okay, because the organism is reaching maturity. And other factor is overcrowding. When this overcrowding, right, the organism's growth will slow down, okay, or when there is limited supply of food and space. Now D is the plateau phase, okay, part of the curve where the curve flattens. So here what happens, the organism reach maturity and maximum growth. So the rate of cell division is equivalent to the rate of cell degeneration. Now the second growth pattern or growth curve is the absolute growth rate curve. Right, it's a graph of rate of growth against time. When we talk about rate of growth, all right, when we talk about rate of growth, it is the changes in parameter. Okay, so in this graph here, we can see that this absolute growth rate curve is represented with a bell-shaped curve, right? And the y-axis here, right, is the changes in parameter. For example, it's like increase in mass per gram per week, for example, right? Changes in parameter. Now, this bell-shaped curve will show you the period where the B, right, where the growth is most rapid, as I mentioned earlier, because this is where the part we have the steepest part of the curve, right? So the growth here is the most rapid. And then we have maximum growth rate, which is shown by the peak of the curve. This peak of the curve will show you the maximum growth rate. And then we have the inflection point here, okay, which marks the maximum rate of growth and the beginning decrease rate of growth, okay. And this bell shape indicates increase in growth rate is almost equal to the decrease in growth rate, right? Now the third growth curve is the relative growth rate curve, which usually represented in percentage, okay. So this relative growth rate curve is a graph of change in growth rate or relative growth rate against time. So the curve will show you the efficiency of growth because it takes into consideration the existing size or mass of the organism. You can see here at week 1, okay, this is the size of the organism, right? Okay, so as the time progresses, the size of the organism decreases. Now, why is this relative growth rate curve is significant? All right, because from studying this relative growth rate curve, right, of two different individual or species in the same environment, we can know, right, which species survive better in that environment, right? So the most suitable condition for growth under different conditions if relative growth rate for organisms grown under different conditions are compared. Now, that is about the growth curve. Now let's proceed with patterns of growth. Okay, so the first patterns of growth that we have is limited growth, which usually shown by human, for example. All right, so limited growth pattern, all right, is the growth of an organism for a relative period of time before its maximum growth. So the organism matures, reproduces, aging, then dies. All right. So the organism will undergo negative growth during aging. Okay. Then this limited growth pattern can be represented with a single sigmoid growth curve. You can see here. This is a single sigmoid growth curve. All right. Because the antagonistic of limited growth pattern is the unlimited growth pattern, where they show a series of sigmoid growth curve. So when you want to explain about this limited growth pattern, you must mention that this limited growth pattern is represented with a single sigmoid growth curve. And then relatively, organisms that show this limited growth pattern has short lifespan, all right, or shorter lifespan compared with the unlimited growth pattern. So organisms that shows or exhibit limited growth pattern have maximum or definite size, like you. Okay, you don't tell me that your size keep on increasing although when you are in your old stage. Okay, no, we don't continue to increase in size throughout our life. No, in humans we have maximum size or definite size. So the growth of organism is complete when maximum size is achieved, right? Now the second growth pattern is the unlimited growth pattern, which is shown by perennial plant that lives in 4 seasons, right? So unlimited growth, all right, is the continuous growth of an organism until it dies. So meaning to say the organisms does not shows negative growth. The organisms will continue to grow, right? So this unlimited growth pattern can be represented with a series of small sigmoid curve. So you can see the small sigmoid curve here. 1, okay, 2, 3, so many small series of sigmoid curve. So relatively organisms, right, has long lifespan. Okay, and then the organisms does not have maximum size, right, or the organism has indefinite increase in size, right, like plants lah, right. So the growth of the organism continues throughout life. Now we can see here in this graph here, right, we take one example of this perennial plant, right, like hydrangea. So from here it grows, okay, during the spring and summer. Now we have autumn, so the growth of the plant will slows down, okay, during autumn. And winter, the plant stays dormant, so the growth will be slightly negative. So after winter we have spring, so the growth continue to increase. After spring we have summer, and then autumn, winter, and then spring, summer, and the cycle continues. All right. Now isometric growth, iso means sama. All right, so the growth of an organ that is proportional to that of the whole body of the organism, right? Or you can say the organ of an organism will grow at the same mean rate as the whole body. So as the body increases, the organ also increases, or as the organ increases in size, the body also increases in size. That is isometric growth, and normally usually shown by fish and grasshopper. So characteristics of these isometric growths, all right, the size increases, but the shape of organism remains the same. And then the relative size of organs remains constant. Increase of surface area will give twice the increase in its length, and the increase of volume or mass of body will give thrice increase in its length, or 3 times. All right. Now we have allometric growth, which usually shown by human. Okay. Now, allometric growth, all right, is the growth of an organ that is not proportional to that of the whole body. So meaning to say, organs of the body will grow at different rate from the rest of the body. You can see here from fetus with adolescent, right? Fetus has larger head compared with the body. Why? Because the head grows faster, all right, compared with the other body. So the characteristics of this allometric growth, all right, the increases of size comes with changes in shape. Okay, you can see how when the size increases, the shape also changes. So the increase in surface area of the whole body is not proportional to the increase in its square length. Alright, and then the increase in volume or mass of the body is not proportional to the increase in its cube length. Right, now class, there is another graph here, right, that shows you allometric growth. Okay, now the title of this graph here is isometric growth in humans. So this is an errata. Sorry for that. Please make the proper pembetulan. No? Okay, cancel isometric, replace this with allometric growths. You can see here the brain in the human, right? The growth rate of the brain is rapid at the beginning of the age, right? The sex organ slows. The growth of the sex organ is slow during the first 10 years, right? But 10, 11 year and above, you can see this, the sex organ, it grows rapidly, which later indicates puberty, right? The same goes for the thymus gland, right? If you compare with the brain, right, the brain grows, okay, until maybe the first 3 years, the rapid growth of the brain. But for the thymus gland, it continues to grow rapidly until the age of maybe 5. Okay. And then we have intermittent growth, right? Intermittent growth, which usually shown by insect or animal with exoskeleton. So intermittent means discontinuous. So intermittent growth pattern, all right, means discontinuous or intermittent growth that occurs at certain periods in young insects. Okay, so in intermittent growth pattern, what happened? A series of ecdysis or molt will produce step-like growth. So you can see a step-like growth. This is not sigmoid, right? This is step-like growth curve. Don't confuse with the unlimited growth pattern. So this intermittent growth pattern can be represented with a step-like curve, right? So little growth occurs between ecdysis or molting, right? The growth stops when the exoskeleton hardens, because growth is limited by the hard exoskeleton. Now, rapid or sudden growth occurs during ecdysis by absorption of water. So in here we can see, right? This region here, the flat curve, right, shows you there is no growth because the exoskeleton hardens, right? And then when the exoskeleton soften during ecdysis or molting, all right, the growth continues, right? And the growth is rapid, right, during ecdysis. Okay, but between this ecdysis or molting, right, the growth is very little. So that's it for today. Okay, see you in the next class. Goodbye.